Don't look unprofessional by sending stems the wrong way. There is more than one way to bounce, and you gotta know the difference between stems, trackouts, dry, raw, and wet. Today, I will help clear up all the confusion, show you the right way to do it, and I'll show you how to do this all the fastest way possible. When I first started getting demo singing clients and sync licensing projects and the subject of sending stems came up, I quickly realized different clients want files delivered in different ways, and it got hella confusing for a sec. Also, it didn't help that Pro Tools introduced a new bouncing function at the time, and I was really confused why none of my effects were bouncing when I used it. If that's you, I'll explain why that happens in just a sec. So let's go through this stuff. I'm gonna be thorough, but it's actually going to simplify everything and make you super efficient. By the way, if we haven't met yet, I'm Kimera, producer, songwriter, vocalist, and Pro Tools expert. You can learn more about me in the description below. There's a lot of terminology thrown around, so here's what you need to know. When people say stems, they often mean individual trackouts, so they're technically wrong. Trackouts is the correct term for bouncing each individual track in the session, and stems are usually grouped audio files, like all your lead vocals on one stem, on one wave, and a background stem is all your background vocals bounced down to one wave file. But these days, people use the terms interchangeably, so if I say stems, I usually mean trackouts, so whatever. With my demo clients, they are hiring me to record vocals, and I include recording, editing, and tuning, but not mixing and mastering. So when I deliver the files, I send them the raw individual stems. But for my sync licensing agencies, they expect fully mixed and mastered stems groups. So what's the difference between raw, dry, and wet? Raw stems are the completely unprocessed audio files bounced from zero, so every track is the same length. All your plugins are turned off, no mastering plugins, no vocal chain plugins like EQ, compression, and no effects like reverb, delay, or anything. I guess technically, some people would say also no tuning. That would be a very raw vocal, but I personally tune and edit my vocals, and I don't send them out without being tuned and edited. So for me personally, raw stems, I actually include my tuning, but no other plugins. Dry stems, on the other hand, will have your vocal chain on, so your de-esser, your EQ, your compression, and whatever else you're using for dynamic or tone shaping plugins, those will be on, but effects will be off, so no reverb, no delay, no chorus. That's dry. Wet stems will include the effects like reverb, delay, and any other fun plugins, but you want to turn off your mastering chain if the producer is doing the final master. Most people send wet stems incorrectly. You do not want to bounce each individual vocal track with the effects on. Instead, you'll want to follow the steps I'm about to explain and separate your effect stems from your vocal stems. Here's why. If you bounce every track individually with its own set of reverb, delay, etc., and you play them all together, it will create a very muddy mixed sound. That's because effects like reverb and delay are designed to work in a summed way, blending all the vocals together cohesively. So bouncing each track with a mix of its own can result in a very ugly, compounded effect that won't sound like the original mix was intended to. Okay, let's bounce. Okay, there are two ways to bounce, and bounce is basically the term we use to convert something in our session to a WAV, MP3, or AIFF file. Whichever way you're doing it, don't forget to select the part of the timeline that you want to bounce. So if I want my song to start here, I could just, maybe select the whole instrumental. That's often how I do it. But I have my song actually starting on a pickup, so I want to make sure that I select enough time to give the entire audio time to start. And I always recommend starting from an even quarter note or something, just in case someone has to dump it into their session and they want it to line up to their session pretty easily. Okay, so if you go to File and then Bounce Mix, this is going to bounce your entire session. Whatever's not muted or whatever is soloed is going to end up bouncing when you do it like this. I see right here that I have something soloed, so I'm gonna go unsolo that. So again, I could go to File and Bounce Mix, or I could do Option Command B, brings up the same dialogue. I'm gonna make it an MP3. You want your file format to be interleaved if you're bouncing a stereo file. If you're only bouncing like this track, then it can be mono because it's a mono track there. But if you want it to also come with like your reverbs and delays, those are gonna cause that to be a stereo track, so you want it to be interleaved. Hit bounce. I don't want to change any of the metadata right now, so I'll just leave that. and then it's going to bounce. It's taking kind of a long time because I have a lot of really heavy processing with some of my plugins. The more plugins you have, the longer it's going to take to bounce. And doing it this way does take longer than the next way I'm going to show you. So why would you use this? If you need to bounce the entire song, if you need to bounce just an acapella, you know, you could mute the beat and then bounce a full acapella for somebody. Or if you are the official mixing engineer and you need to make those stems groups, I would do it this way and just mute the things that you're not going to be bouncing in that particular stem group. By the way, I'm suggesting mute as opposed to solo because I don't know if you have your system set up correctly. If you happen to have all of your auxiliaries in solo safe mode, then you're good to go ahead and use the solo function. But if you don't have things in solo safe mode and you solo something, you're gonna have to also go solo all these as well. So make sure you know about solo safe mode. But I'm guessing you're not here to learn about the mixed stem groups. You probably want to know about the individual stems bouncing. So let's get into the good stuff now. The track bounce function is the thing that's going to save us a ridiculous amount of time. So when you have a track or multiple tracks selected, like so, and the timeline is selected, right? This is the length of our bounce. We don't really need it to be that long because we're only bouncing this audio, so it can end sooner technically. What you would do is make sure the ones that you want to be bouncing are selected, and you would right-click on this, and here is that bounce function. This is different from the one in the file menu. When you click bounce here, it does bring up a similar menu, but this is the track bounce as opposed to the mix bounce. See how it says name prefix? It is going to add text to the end of each stem with the name of the track. So this is going to end up bouncing me 4 different tracks that are gonna be called Won't Let Me Down _ VLead1, Won't Let Me Down _ VLead2, etc. File type, format, I wanted to use mono this time because I'm bouncing the mono audio files as opposed to the beat, which is stereo. So the most important thing to note is that when you do it this way, it is only going to bounce what is on this particular track. Since I have my audio routing out bus 1 and 2 to my vocal chain, which is over here, that has my EQ, my compression, etc., and it sends to my special effects. When I bounce this track, none of that stuff is going to bounce with it. It's only going to bounce what's on the track. What I have on the track is auto-tune. So my auto-tune is going to bounce with it because it's right on the track, okay? That is so important because you might have used this function before and then go listen to your stems and you're like, why isn't any of my processing on here? Well, that's the way it works. And if you want to then bounce your dry stems or your wet mixed stems, we'll go over that next because you do that a little bit differently. If you want to bounce the dry stems, meaning you get the EQ, compression, and all of that, but you don't want it to include your reverbs, etc., you will actually want to bounce a stem of the auxiliary track itself, so of your vocal chain. So when I do a bounce of this, here's a better example. This is my background vocal auxiliary. If I did a bounce of this, it's gonna bounce everything that comes through this channel, which, if you look at my routing, the input of this is 5/6. So all of these go out 5/6. So that stem is gonna include all 4 of those tracks, okay? So if you're doing like a grouped background vocal track, that's how you'd want to do it. You could go ahead and bounce all of your auxiliary backgrounds. And if you're doing one stem for all your leads, you can go ahead and do it this way. And if there's multiple leads going to that same vocal chain, they're all gonna come out on that one stem. So some vocals might be overlapping and you might not want that, right? By the way, these instructions assume that you have your session set up the correct way. So if I lost you at auxiliary track or vocal chain, before you go any further, please go watch my video, how to set up your vocal session template, and I'll give you the step-by-step proper way to set up a session. I'll put a link to that video below. And while you're here, please give me a subscribe and like. If you want the actual individual stems, the quickest way to do that, and this is maybe a little bit of a trick to quickly bouncing each individual track dry with the EQ and stuff on it. And let's use our background vocals as the example since there are multiple background vocals on this one bus. First thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my panning and my volume all the way up, because when we bounce it this way, it also is going to use the settings that were on this track, which was lowered volume, and we probably want to send the stem as full volume. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the other 3 tracks that I don't need. I just want the first one first, and then I'm going to go ahead and bounce the auxiliary track. I am going to add to the name that this is BGV1, and then it's going to add like back aux to this track. So if you want to go edit the file names after, you can. I'm going to want to put it as a wave, so this is a high quality file, and I want it to be mono. Unless maybe I had like a stereo widener on here, but I don't have that. I want this to be the mono dry stem. So I'm gonna hit bounce. Then I'm gonna go ahead and mute that one, unmute the second one, and do it again. I'm gonna change the name to BGV2. It seems like it's time consuming, but it is much faster than doing it the bounce mix way. Mute that one, unmute this one, do it again. BGV3. BGV4. Okay, so let's go double check our files. And if you were wondering anyway, where do you retrieve your bounced files? It's in the folder that's created wherever you saved this session when you opened it first. So this session for me, it's called Won't Let Me Down. It automatically made this bounced files folder for me, and there are our stems that we've bounced so far. This is the full bounce mix that we made initially, so this is gonna have the full vocal. I'm gonna just press play and make sure we hear it. As I lift my head, won't let me down again. Okay, and then I wanna double check that these sound like they're dry, but they have my EQ and compression on it. It won't let me down again. Very good. Deeper breath, let it fill my chest as I lift my head. Won't let. Yeah, I know I can hear that it does have my EQ compression and stuff on it. So those are your dry stems, but what about wet stems, okay? This is all you have to do. First of all, unmute things that you may have muted. And with the wet, you want it to be mixed how you originally had it. So I would maybe bounce the effects first so you keep the integrity of your mix the way it was going through the effects chains. Okay, so just put those back. You're gonna go to your effects chains and you can select all of them at once and then just go ahead and right click and bounce these. These are stereo. I wanna make sure that I put them back to interleaved, wave 2448, perfect. This is so much faster than doing the bounce mix of things. Okay, cool, so check it out. It just added our effect stems here. Let's just listen to what that sounds like. Awesome, awesome. So the idea now is that when you put all of these into a session, it's gonna sound exactly the same as it did in your session. And again, if you want, you can come in here and edit any of the file names. I might go in here and write dry. I could have done that when I bounced it, but maybe I wanna like delete all these back aux ones. Like I don't really need that information in there. So this is the correct way to do wet stems. You actually deliver the vocals themselves dry, and then you deliver the effects separately, one chain at a time. So just my reverb, just my short delay, just my medium delay, just my chorus. You might have a client that requests every individual stem have the effects baked into them, but they're technically asking for the wrong thing. That would actually make the mix kind of bad. They just might not be aware of how it works. When people ask me for wet stems, this is how I send it, and normally no one says anything. But if they come back to me and say, I did it wrong and I need to send them each individual stem, I'll tell them, I'll educate them and say, technically, this is the correct way to deliver wet stems so the mix doesn't become muddy. But if they really want it that way, I'll have to sit here and solo each track one by one and do the bounce mix function and sit and wait. For sending files, I would, again, double check your work, go back, Just press play, make sure you did everything right. You hear it, it sounds good. Because I can't tell you how many times I've sent like an acapella with the click track playing in the background and they're like, can you send without the click? Because I didn't double check my work. What I would recommend is to select all your stems and right click, new folder with selection, and make this a zip folder. Right click, compress. This will make it a zip if you're on Mac, and then send them this zipped folder. If you want to work faster and more efficiently, this playlist will give you all of my tricks for a streamlined workflow, and it'll help you level up your vocal production skills. I highly recommend the vocal chain video, the how to build a template properly video, and if you go to my main channel, you'll find more playlists like me demoing different plugins so you can hear what they sound like, and a playlist on how to make money with your music. So again, please subscribe, browse some of those videos, and I'll see you in the next one.